Laura Layla, or Kathy, if that's your real name. I'm going to watch your video several times. I've watched it one and a bit so far, but I'm going to answer now. I think my answers will change. I know I need to absorb the video more, so I reserve right to change anything I've said here, especially any way I've characterized your meaning. But on my second way through, I decided to answer right now, and yeah, the answer will change. That's why I'm answering now, so I can see the progression of the answer. All right, now you talk about the use of these kind of labels and this idea of schizophrenia in a medical illness diagnosis, and I understand that that's true. But when you're saying people need that because they need help alleviating these serious symptoms, I mean, my issue is, well, I may have been alleviating these serious symptoms. Think an analogy here, if you will, for a moment, of a medical diagnosis. Let's say you're diagnosed with some form of cancer, mild as cancer goes, but you have cancer, and you're given 5 years to live, and instead of letting a doctor treat you, you say, I can handle this myself, and you change and have a healthy lifestyle. And because of the nature of the cancer and the effectiveness of a healthy lifestyle as a remedy, even the doctors would say, yeah, you cured yourself. Now, they would not say you didn't have cancer just because you didn't require external help, because you were able to handle it yourself. So in a medical framework of psychology, if you want to have a diagnosis, it's eventually going to have to be something material. If it's difficult to measure, or even, well, if it's fundamentally impossible, if it's logically impossible to measure, okay, and if it's materially turns out that nature doesn't work away such that it's measured, like you have to measure momentum and position at the same time, and they're related and you can't. So then there's a problem. But basically, let me put it this way. It's okay if it's some internal thing that at the moment we can't measure. So let's just say, for example, with schizophrenia, you're not going to be able to say that their life has to fall apart. Eventually, you're going to have a diagnosis more material than that. Let's just say we can measure people when they're conscious have a 40 hertz. So let's just say that's 40 times a second your brain has some wave shape, some energy shape in it. Then it goes through 0, it has another one, boom, boom, boom. 40 times a second. So obviously we would have to look into this, but this is the point. Choose some unit. I'm going to use 40 times a second as my unit, meaning when you're conscious you have 40 seconds of 40 thoughts, reactions, individuated moments of conception a second. And you would want to define something like schizophrenia as in how many of those, what's the ratio of those that are what I'm calling magical thinking. I understand there's technical versions of this, but frankly I would like to mix the terms up, use a colloquial in this. Now, I sometimes complain when people do this not really complain, but I point out when people are doing this in logic. But I think in psychology, we have more work to do. We need to keep this stuff loose. But I understand. I want to also respect that the distinctions in some of these terms, and some that I might not be aware of the distinction. But you would have how many moments? Because like if you're having 40 magical moments, a second, they're all magical, then I think the technical term is you're batshit crazy, right? But obviously, I've talked to lots of schizophrenic people diagnosed with schizophrenia. They know where they're sitting, and they know they're in a cafeteria or have been put in an institution, or that they're at a dinner party, or that it's Christmas time, or anything else. They know this. It's more like at 10 or 20%. Just 4 or 5 or 6 magical thoughts a moment is enough to really disrupt you and possibly cause you to become to have problem functioning in society, in the non-magical thought world, in the world where what we're alleging are I'm going to argue they're all magical, and it's really data processing and how we make correspondences between our thoughts and what it might mean. That's the issue, how you process those. But it's also true that if you're having a lot of the radio telling you things that are important to you or whatever those symptoms are going to be, yeah, that's super distracting. And so you could create a threshold for schizophrenia of, oh, if you have, 30%, I'm just choose a number. I'm saying we can invent criteria where we empirically study these numbers, but I have to invent them because I don't, you know what I mean? Okay, so let's say it's 30%. Well, at that percent, maybe you choose that percent because that's the level at which people have statistically trouble functioning. But some people couldn't function with a little bit of these thoughts, and some people could function with a large amount. And the difficulty of defining what you mean function, and if it's just keeping a job and being a responsible parent or whatever. And these people are going to have flaws, and you're either going to have to choose to say, well, the flaw is a part of this, or no, the flaw doesn't count, because you can't make the diagnosis based on needing external help, though. It's got to be based on something that's happening sort of within a domain in and of itself. Now, nothing's truly in and of itself. I understand you brought up issues of edge, and what is the edge really in this thing that, as far as I know, is a Quine idea about the mind as a territory with an edge, which is a great, awesome metaphor. But anyway, so, alleviating, someone might have become really good at alleviating symptoms, and you can't, it's almost not fair. Now, here's the funny thing. We can't read people's minds, so maybe we'd never be able to tell how many per 40 are magical or past some threshold of, or internal. Maybe there's a material way to define it, or internal instead of direct from sense perception, or whatever the definition is going to be. You can't read. But in philosophy, I am the subject. I am that psychology. I'm one of them. So in a solipsistic philosophical contemplation stage, I can try to be honest and see how many are magical, because there's time involved, and I have at the moment I react to a certain way, but I have another time to second guess, and I can use rulers and microscopes and all kinds of measuring devices in ways that are ways of checking myself and double checking me against things that are more consistent than each of those moments, right? And I can use this to do data reduction and get an idea of what I really think is going on out there, regardless of the voices and stuff. I could hear a loud voice from the radio and realize it's not really able to tell me because of other things I know about the radio. So, I have a bunch of other things here. Maybe they should wait, but I would like to talk about this more, and like I say, I'm planning to watch your video again and just make other videos as I have other ideas because of it. But I want to respect your definitions. I'm glad you're willing to respect the looseness with which I want to talk about them, because in my own case, I do want to mix up the language between technical things I know and the fact that there's terms that I know have a technical meaning maybe I don't even understand, that I could in some circumstances avoid using it. But for me, I want to maintain a bit of a confusion register, a noise in which we have to take things loosely and then sharply and loosely, and we should make the term definitions in this case like always. But instead of doing that to decide this phrase means that, we should say this phrase means a spectrum of things. Oh, and I remembered one other thing I'll say. Yeah, I won't go through the other notes on the deal, but right now, but oh Jesus, slipped my mind again. So I wanted to tell you how my spectrum is working right now. First of all, I've always followed psychology to a certain degree, but it's not my scientific interest, so not as deep as in physics. But I followed it, and like a lot of people, I think, well, there's all kinds of bullshit, and I know, and I talk to psychologists when I'm at a cocktail party, and I ask them about their theories, and I find out there's a lot of different ideas about psychology among the people practicing it as well. So it's not like logic. Logic, different people think different reasons it comes from different things, but when it comes to here's what we do, there's a lot of conformity in this, and there's a gradient of this kind of thing. But I have seen recently that I think the personality disorder spectrum and schizophrenia have come together. But I still have my own view, but I think these terms are becoming useful. So my own model now is in terms of those other things, but I also am generalizing. So let me just tell you how I'm generalizing. To me, I think schizophrenia is like a whole spectrum of these magical thinking issues, and it's something we all are thinking more magically than we realize. You can have a dogmatic faith in what you think science is, and that's still magical thinking, but it might do better at seeming not magical because, you know, it has a tradition of, well, ask science, and in science they're doing skeptical checking with their senses, right? So it just happens to work out better, but it's still magical. But anyway, so I think the schizophrenia as we know it is people who display the magical, so they deviate from normative magical thinking into obviously magical thinking, right? And the personality disorders seem to be like the colors of this spectrum. I think they've done a good job. And I see there's other proposals and stuff's getting shifted around, and names, bipolar, and you know, and antisocial, the psychopathic stuff. It's still shifting around, but it's better than, in my opinion, a better model than I've ever seen so far. So again, the schizophrenia I'm using loosely as this general thing. And when we diagnose schizophrenia, it tends to be where the magical thinking is voices, instruction, personal meaning, gods and stuff like fairies, like this, things that are able to give you, or your dog or whatever, but in a human, anthropomorphized, can give you human communication level. So that just happens at the brightest colors of the spectrum that can happen. Everybody's hearing a little bit of that. And then with the personality disorders, it's the different colors. Like it'll be a narcissistic magical feeling, or a paranoid magical feeling, or a self-esteem related magical feeling through the rest of the spectrum, which are the primary colors, remains to be seen. And that's basically what we're trying to do, to find the spectrum, to find the imaginary colors. And I think in the end, we all think this way, we all cope this way. You can have certain frames, going to cognitive science, you can have certain frames that you use to interpret things so that your end result of your behavior and your belief system of what's going on can seem more or less sane, and that's through being more or less apt with experiences in the material world, which ends up being a pragmatic basis, right? And so for example, back when everybody had super magical thinking about God-related things, and if they saw an angel in the clouds, even if they were a very rationally type person, they might accept it as it appeared to be, and that's what it was, and accept that magical thinking. But it's compartmentalized. It could have still been rational in another way. You can always have the chance of adjusting back to facing reality when the time comes, and through situational thinking, for example, which I would consider an information processing technique. Okay, so what I'm saying is then these people that would be so-called neurotypical, they just have an interpretation where it matches well enough, and because they're confirming each other's biases, it's even more possible. You can have crazy ideas and be a mall person and think the world is a certain way and get along with it, because if there's enough people confirming it, doesn't mean the world really is that way. What they really have is a belief structure. In other words, they have a magical thinking idea that instead of thinking that they're gang stalked, they have a magical idea that life is a certain way, and businessmen and politicians are this way, and judges are this way, and all of their roles. And since they're all confirming those, the magical thinking doesn't seem as magical, just merely because it doesn't show up. You know, if you have a green piece of paper, the green lines don't show up as lines. If it's a yellow piece of paper, the green lines will show up, vice versa. So, okay, that was Rain Down on your video. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for giving it to me. I guess I feel like it's a personal gift, but anyway, cheers.